This great saint was born in 1585 at Vignanello, in Tuscany, of the noble family of the Mariscotti, and received in baptism the name of Clarice. Responding to the promptings of grace and to the instructions of her excellent parents, she, at an early age, found great delight in prayer and other pious practices, and distinguished herself by her perfect obedience and delicate modesty. As she was, moreover, possessed of an excellent disposition and superior qualities of mind, her relatives and friends rejoiced in the thought that she would one day be an exemplary child of the Church and an ornament of the family. But as she grew older, Clarice began to manifest a spirit of frivolity and worldly mindedness, so that she seemed to care for nothing but the amusements and vanities of the world. To check and correct this dangerous disposition, her parents placed her in the care of the Franciscan sisters of the convent of St. Bernardine, at Viterbo. But neither the example of her elder sister, who was a member of the community, nor the lessons and admonitions of the sisters made a lasting impression on her frivolous mind, so that, to the grief of her family, she returned to her home with the same disposition with which she had left it, though she still performed acts of piety, and kept herself free from grosser faults. At the age of 20, Clarice set her heart upon marriage with a certain nobleman, but was passed by in favor of a younger sister. Greatly mortified at this, she became morose and captious, a burden to herself and others. Her father, weary of her conduct, at length suggested to her that she become a nun, a peculiar advice, indeed, as the convent is the last place in the world suited for a morose and capricious person. The thoughts and actions of man, however, are directed by an all-knowing and all-wise God, and the advice of the anxious father, as the sequel showed, proved to be providential, for God had indeed destined his daughter for a high degree of sanctity in the religious life. Clarice, after some deliberation, determined to take the veil in order, as she said, to hide her chagrin and to satisfy the wish of her family. She received the habit in the convent of St. Bernardine, at Viterbo, where the sisters followed the rule of the Third Order regular, under the guidance and jurisdiction of the friars minor. Clarice then took the name of Hyacintha. As she had not entered the convent from any higher motive, and even against her own inclination, she did not strive to acquire the spirit of a religious, but was determined to lead a life of comfort and ease. She declared that, although she was a nun, she meant to live according to her rank. Accordingly, she made use of the influence and means which her family possessed, and had her room furnished with every luxury. She kept her own kitchen, wore a habit made of the finest material, and received and made visits at pleasure. In this manner, Hyacintha spent the first 10 years of her life in the convent, disregarding the remonstrances of her superior and the grief of the other sisters. At the same time, however, she did not neglect her prayers and her religious exercises, though, no doubt, they were often performed as a matter of form. She also showed great respect for the mysteries of religion, always remained pure, and had a tender devotion to the Blessed Sacrament and to the Mother of God. But now the time had come when God, who had great designs in regard to Hyacintha's soul, deigned to arouse her from her spiritual lethargy and to call her more urgently to a life of virtue and perfection. Hyacintha was prostrated by a serious illness, and Father Antony Bianchetti, the spiritual director of the community, was called to hear her confession. The holy religious was so surprised, on entering her cell, to see the luxury which surrounded her, and which had been tolerated too long through regard for her family, that he most severely upbraided her, telling her that heaven was not for vain and proud persons. At the same time, he declared that, unless she would remove all superfluous and vain things and conform to the rule, he would deny her absolution. Hyacintha's better nature gained the victory, and filled with shame and confusion at the thought of her lukewarm and unmodified life, promised to mend her ways and to repair the scandal she had given. As soon as she had sufficiently recovered from her illness, she did away with all she possessed contrary to the rule, and, with many tears, and with a cord about her neck, asked pardon of the assembled community for her many faults. Force of habit, however, threatened for a time to make her fall back into her former tepidity, but another illness, more serious and longer than the former, put an end to all hesitation and half-heartedness, and she now began a life of heroic self-denial and penance. To remove all danger of a relapse, and to punish her former luxury and love of ease, she strove to deny herself every comfort and pleasure. She exchanged her dainty garments for others made of the coarsest material. She allowed herself only a few hours of the night for sleep, and that on a bed consisting of vine branches, with a stone for a pillow. She frequently scourged herself severely, and fasted on bread and water, so often, indeed, that her life seemed to be a continual Lent. Nothing could satisfy her desire for suffering and mortification. For this reason, she daily invented new methods of torturing her body. In addition to this, she was frequently afflicted by diseases, and misunderstood and persecuted by persons loved and esteemed by her, but she bore all in the spirit of penance with heroic patience. Exterior penances, however, are but the means of acquiring and preserving those interior virtues which alone render the soul pleasing to God. In this light did Hyacintha look upon them, and with the grace of God, she advanced in virtue in proportion as she died to the world and to self. She looked upon herself as the greatest of sinners, delighted in performing the most menial and repulsive labors, and so distrusted herself that, in her personal conduct, notwithstanding her rare talents, her supernatural lights, and her skill in guiding others, she always had recourse to the judgment of her director and of other pious persons. To humility, she joined almost continuous prayer. She spent the greater part of the night in prayer and contemplation, during which she received great enlightenment, both for herself and for the guidance of others. She was almost continually subject to spiritual dryness and aridity, yet, with heroic resignation, she never ceased to apply herself to the spiritual exercises. To suffer, she exclaimed, and to persevere without consolation, that is the true sign of the Spirit of God. Great was her devotion to the blessed Eucharist, to the Holy Infant Jesus, and to the Mother of God. In her love for Jesus in the Blessed Sacrament, she tried to lead all her acquaintances to the practice of the perpetual adoration. She also introduced, at Viterbo, the 40 hours devotion during the days of the carnival preceding Ash Wednesday, to atone for the excesses committed during those days. Loving God, Hyacintha also loved her neighbor. Moved by this love, she was not only full of charity, kindness, and patience toward the sisters, especially toward the novices and pupils committed to her charge, but did everything in her power to alleviate suffering and need outside the walls of the convent. She shared in every good work, assisting chiefly in extinguishing feuds, in rescuing young girls from the dangers to which they were exposed, and in reclaiming those who had fallen. With the grace of God, she succeeded so well in this, that the decree of canonization says, by this apostolate of charity, Hyacintha has won more souls for God than many preachers of her time. To relieve the poor and the sick, she established 2 confraternities, one of which collected alms for the convalescent and for the poor ashamed to beg, and gave aid to prisoners, the other procured homes for the aged. God rewarded the heroic virtues and charity of the saint by many miracles. She had the gift of prophecy and of discerning the secret thoughts of others. She was also favored by heavenly ecstasies and raptures. After having thus atoned for the faults of her early life, Hyacintha was called to her eternal reward on January 30th, 1640. Many miracles were wrought at her tomb, wherefore she was beatified by Pope Benedict XIII in 1726, and canonized by Pope Pius VII in 1807.